Welcome back, everybody, to this read-along book club of Jeff Vandermeer's, well, the entire Southern Reach trilogy, but right now we are talking about Authority Book 2, and today we're talking about chapters 3 through 7, because it's another day at the office for Control. And we are going to dig deeper into the mystery that is Area X and the Southern Reach, of course. Still, there will be more mysteries yet to solve that are going to come up as well. But before I begin with the chapters and the overviews and the discussion, I think it's important to talk about how I feel about the book so far compared to Annihilation. And I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments as well. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is that numerous people have told me that this is their favorite book in the entire trilogy. And while I do enjoy this book, I enjoy every book in this trilogy, this one doesn't have the level of polish and craftsmanship that I feel like Annihilation does. So Annihilation, it was lean, it was mean, it was 5 chapters long. Every chapter was like a natural, just beautiful progression, almost a short story within itself, ending on a cliffhanger or ending in some way that wanted me to just keep going and keep going. And just the word choice, so much across the board. I gushed about it already. You guys don't want to hear it anymore. This book, however, while it's interesting, I'm finding there's a lot of parts of it where I'm just kind of like, I don't really need this right now, or I don't think that's necessary. Don't get me wrong. It's very well written, and maybe the style in which it is written is reminiscent of, or it's trying to be more in line with the fact that this is a corporate conspiracy or a governmental conspiracy, clandestine agency conspiracy. It feels a little bit heavier. It feels a little bit, I don't want to say less polished, but less tightly crafted. But again, I'm still really enjoying it. It just doesn't have that level of, I don't know. I was just really, really impressed with not only the story and the atmosphere, but the writing itself of Annihilation. It just felt like I wouldn't change a word. In Authority, there are some words I would change. But let's move on. Let's talk about Chapter 3, Processing. Later back in his office, having left Whitby in his world, Control made one more sweep for bugs. Then he prepared to call the voice. Now, I was hoping to get a little bit more information because in Chapter 2, we left off with Control and Whitby in this weird, creepy dungeon-like facility. And I was hoping we would get more of a glimpse into that. And perhaps we will later on in the story, but it seems like we've just kind of flashed forward for whatever reason. So either Control didn't find anything interesting, or he's not going to tell us about it quite yet. But the voice, the interesting thing about the voice is that we don't know the gender because the voice's voice is masked by some kind of digital effect of some kind. You'll see here as well that Jeff Vandermeer notes that we do not know the sex of this person, if it's male or female, because it says S/he could have been somewhere nearby. So even Control is hypothesizing that maybe the voice is watching him through some of these bugs. Who knows? But neither his mother nor the voice had told him what might be expected from any report. So he goes in very blind. And we know how it ends up for him. Basically, it tells the voice a bunch of stuff, and the voice is like, hey, next time, tell me something that I don't already know. But more interestingly than that, his mother says, you'll likely never know the identity of the voice. You need to put that question out of your head. Concentrate on what's in front of you. Do what you do best. So she is trying to egg her son on. And interestingly enough, she's very much using him, at least appears to be using him. But we'll get into it. So the voice used Control's real name, John Rodriguez, which was another thing to note. But report, the voice says simply. Tell me about the scientists. Tell me about the science division. You met with them today. What's the state of things there? We met a man named, he's the head of the department, named Mike Cheney, with a little bit of a southern accent. His second in command, Deborah Davidson, who is also a physicist. But their numbers are depleting. What once had been a wide territory for the science division had bit by bit been taken away from them. So as noted above right here, they were like a cat confronted by a predator. So they are looking at him as perhaps a danger to what they're doing here or what they're not doing here. But the piece of resistance, quote unquote, as his father used to joke, was a video of white rabbits disappearing across the invisible border. This is such a cool sequence of events because he's watching these videos, and it looks like the event had occurred in the mid-1990s. The scientists had let loose 2,000 white rabbits. They had some hope that the simultaneous or near simultaneous breaching of the border by so many living bodies might overload, quote unquote, the mechanism, quote unquote, behind the border, causing it to short circuit. So for whatever reason, they thought maybe This force field of sorts can be overloaded. If we throw a ton of bodies at it, it's not going to be able to process it, or it's going to break it down. That's not really what happened. But the video in the digital library contained more than 40,000 video segments of rabbits vanishing, jumping, squirming atop one another as they formed sloppy rabbit pyramids in their efforts not to be pushed into the border. Cool thing to note about that is that as humans, yes, we know something happened, but these very simple creatures as well, they know something's not quite right. They know something's wrong. They know they do not want to cross over. But disappeared as they hit the edge of the border. There was no ripple, no explosion of blood and organs. They just disappeared. So there's not really much to see other than a blink out of sight. But also an awful screaming had arisen from the herded rabbits. But if the video had continued, this is a cool, omniscient step out of the POV. So throughout most of this book, we're in a limited third-person POV. However, here, we note if the video had continued, Control would have seen the last of the rabbits rebel so utterly against being herded that they turned on the herders and fought, leaping to bite and scratch. Would have seen the white of the shields stain red, the researchers so surprised that they mostly broke ranks, and a good 200 rabbits went missing. So it's a very violent thing that Control did not see, but we, as the reader, got to see what would have happened next. Nor had any similar experiments on a far smaller scale produced any results whatsoever. So we already know. There was a lot of questions on the Discord server early on about, and it seems like the Southern Reach, they don't really know anything. They've been going at this thing for, what, 30 years or so, and have really learned nothing, which really speaks to the way the staff is, right? They're a dwindling staff. They're very indifferent. And we remember last time the assistant director, Grace, mentioned something about, you don't understand, you don't take this home with you. We've lived through this day in and day out, and we are exhausted. So even though it's new to us, it's new to Control, it's very old for them. When Control left, they had all stood there in an awkward line as if he were about to take a photograph, and shook his hand one by one. He wondered if instead they were afraid of something else entirely. Most of this Control had told the voice. Some of the scientists had used the words environmental boon to describe Area X. This is another mention of it. So I remember the biologist in Annihilation was thinking to herself anyway, well, writing it down for us to read, that maybe this isn't a bad thing. Maybe this quote-unquote infection isn't a bad thing. Should we be fighting it? This is a pristine wilderness after all. Human-made toxins are now absent. So we also know that Jeff Vandermeer is an environmentalist. It's very, very important to him. And he is speaking through his characters right here. And I think it's something cool to consider in the face of what is really a science fiction horror novel, is that the horror itself could be a good thing. And God damn it, the voice screams right here, but it's because, sorry, I spilled some coffee on myself. Continue. That made me laugh because at first I thought the voice was angry, and I'm sure that's Vandermeer's intention. But it was cool to see a little bit of humor in here because so far everything about these books have been very, very serious, very bleak, very kind of hopeless. And the voice goes on and on and on to drill him about everything. What is your impression of the prior director? It's a complicated situation here. A hoarder, an eccentric, an enigma. What is your impression of the prior director? All in caps, screaming, of course. It all spilled out his nascent opinions. Enough! Next time, the voice said, I expect you to have something more interesting to tell me. Ask the assistant director about the biologist. So even the voice is very, very interested in the biologist, why the director chose her. And remember, I'm always watching, so really think about what it might be that I don't know. So the voice is almost this comic book-like villain who doesn't really tell Control, hey, this is what I want you to look for, just expecting him to give this voice good information or things that they don't know. But moving on, Control had asked for their current theories about the border. This is being Cheney, this is being Davidson, and Cheney says, I wish I could be more definite about this, but, you know, we argue about it a lot because there are so many unknowns. But, well, I personally don't believe that the border necessarily comes from the same source as whatever is transforming Area X. And this is when they have kind of the two-pronged, you know, hypothesis, I guess, which I thought was kind of cool because I never quite thought of it that way. There's no evidence that the presence in Area X also generated the border. And then Davidson also spoke about them. It may be that the one event occurred to create Area X, and then a second event occurred to create the invisible border, but they aren't related. Well, only in that event 2 was almost certainly a reaction to event 1. That it's possible this second entity was trying to contain the fallout from event 1? Exactly. What about the way into Area X through the border? One day it was just there. Which event creator opened a door in the border, do you think? We don't know if its main purpose was to let something in, or to allow something out. We already know a little bit about this, so we know people are going in, And then Area X is learning of their form, right? Their biological makeup, and then transforming these people into animals and other things within Area X, but then also sending copies out to do what? Other than die of cancer? We're not quite sure. Control caught up with the assistant director and asked, "Why didn't you want the biologist on the 12th expedition?" She did not have the right qualifications. She had been fired from half a dozen jobs, and her husband's position on the prior expedition, that compromised her too. The director didn't agree. How is Whitby working out anyway? So she just kind of brushes his questioning completely aside. She suspected something, didn't she? Control presses. She suspected that they might have changed since the autopsies, but if you're asking, you already know. And no, they hadn't changed. And this is when we learn that Southern Reach had a props department to make all of this stuff, which is weird, fabricating antiquated technology. So all of the out-of-date things they were taking or across the border because it seemed to deactivate any kind of technology whatsoever. So I guess they were maybe thinking that the older it gets, maybe there'll be a point in time if we take something over that's very, very old, it might be okay. But of course, at day's end on his way out, he ran into Whitby again. "Whitby, why are there so few returning journals from the expeditions? Far, far fewer than returnees." "Incomplete data, but most returnees tell us they just don't think to bring them back. Most of the journals seem to turn up in the lighthouse anyway, as we know. I can show you something interesting in one of the rooms near the science division that pertains to this." "Why don't you just tell me about it?" "No, I have to show you. It's a little strange. You have to see it to understand it." Whitby is a weird, weird guy. And that brings us to the end of chapter 3 and the beginning of chapter 4, Reentry. The town of Headley was a 40-minute drive from the Southern Reach. So this whole chapter is kind of more backstory about Control, about this little quaint house he lives in, or he's renting anyway. But there's something ominous about this town, even though it is picturesque. A stillness when the breeze off the river died signaled a shift in mood, and some of the bars just off the waterfront had long been notorious for sudden, senseless violence. So even this quaint town seems to be affected by something. Maybe it's the proximity to Area X? Who knows? He'd had strange thoughts about the inhabitants of those coastal towns to either side of Area X being somehow mutated under the skin. That is so The Shadow over Innsmouth by H.P. Lovecraft. And I know I have yet to find any mention that Vandermeer says that Lovecraft inspired him in the writing of these books, but man, there are far too many similarities. But I guess that kind of like seaside folk getting transformed by some kind of evil thing in the water, maybe that's not that new. The fact was, the Southern Reach knew so little about Area X, even after 3 decades. Again, he's reminding us that they're just kind of constantly shooting in the dark, but never getting anywhere. But his mother had come from Central, and they'd met in a conference room he knew was probably bugged, because his mom, she's like a flash of light, as he calls her. He hadn't seen her in a long time, and she shows up to try to recruit him to work at the Southern Reach. It had been 5 years since he'd seen her. There you go. It will be like coming home, John, won't it? You'll be comfortable with the setting. You'll be comfortable with the people. It's a chance to erase the past. The past. Which part of the past? They're downsizing this department, although you might not know that, and you'll be on the chopping block, and this is the right fit for you. He knew that he was the black sheep, that his lack of advancement reflected poorly on her. This might be your last chance. At least, it's the last chance I can get for you. So his mom is almost giving him an ultimatum here. Don't you want to know more than I know? You will if you take this position. Ooh, dangling that carrot. The closer you are, the safer you are, she whispered in his ear. Closer to what? Dusk had settled over Headley by the time he pulled into the driveway. So this is when we get a look at his little house, and we get to meet El Chorizo, who is a huge black and white cat, who is jumping out from the bushes, also known as Chori. There was only one message from Mary Phillips, his girlfriend, until they'd broken up about 6 months ago. So Control's life is just, he doesn't really have a family. He lost his girlfriend. This job is really weird. Things aren't going so hot for him. But always have an exit strategy was something his mother had repeated ad nauseum from his first day of training. So he had a standard packet hidden in a false bottom of a suitcase. And then we get a little personal glimpse into his life. On the mantle over a brick fireplace that was mostly for show, he had placed a chessboard. But the chessboard had been frozen in time, reflected the progress of their last game together, being his father. Control decides it's time to go for a run. But while he's running, he kept reliving the meetings and, in particular, the questioning of the biologist. He had already scheduled at least 3 more interviews of the biologist for the week, as well as a tour of the entry point into Area X at the border. I'm really excited for that because I have no memory of it. It had discrete boundaries. Okay, we're learning a lot more about the actual boundaries of Area X, and I thought this was really cool. Including to about 1 mile out to sea, the military had put up floating berms and patrolled the area ceaselessly. The border extended about 70 miles inland from the lighthouse and approximately 40 miles east and 40 miles west along the coast. It ended just below the stratosphere and underground even. This is crazy. Just above the asthenosphere. The door might not have been created by whatever had created Area X, so somebody wants them to come in, perhaps. You could not get under the border by any means on the seaward side. You could not tunnel under it on the landward side. You could not penetrate it with an advanced instrumentation or radar or sonar. From satellites peering down from above, you would see only wilderness in apparent real time, nothing out of the ordinary, even though this was an optical lie. The night the border had come down, it had taken ships and planes and trucks with it. So we get a really quick kind of montage glimpse at what went down when the border came down. That's what's always been a weird way of describing. And I always feel like when something is put up, you put it up, right? Not that it comes down, but I guess it's coming. They think it's coming down from space, perhaps? I don't know. But the border coming down, that always feels like it's being removed, not installed. But because they were about to disappear, these people, and could do nothing about it, all of it complicated by the fog. Some, though, just stood there watching as the ship disintegrated. They were resigned to their fates. His thoughts turned again to the biologist, to the need to know what the biologist had seen and experienced in Area X. Somewhere across the river and off to the left lay Area X. So it's crazy that it's so close still, right? He's lived here, and he notes that as well, that, yeah, right here, expeditions would have been coming back or not coming back while he was still in high school. That gives such a great sense of history, because I feel like in so many stories, we're experiencing, I've probably already talked about this, but we're always experiencing these things, this pivotal event as it's happening and what the direct aftermath is. But what I love about this series is it's been going on they've been studying it for over 30 years and have nothing on it, no information, well, very little information anyway. And it's cool. He's starting to think of himself. He's placing himself in time where he was when all this stuff was going on without him knowing about it. He also didn't know that his mother had worked briefly for the Southern Reach. And so he stands there, listening to the croaking of frogs, the lap and splash of water against the side of the speedboat as a breeze rippled across the river. It wasn't a true wilderness, was comfortingly close to civilization, but existed just enough apart to create a boundary. Boundary, interesting word there. This was what most people wanted, to be close to, but not part of. They didn't want the fearful unknown of a pristine wilderness. There's that quote again. And while he's standing here on this dock, staring out at the beautiful water, he is thinking about whether he should just pursue an exit strategy now. But he knew that when morning came, he would arise as Control, not John Rodriguez, and that he would go back to the Southern Reach because he's a man of duty, or something else. He's convinced by his mother. He feels like he has no choice. But let's move on to another part that is titled Rights. And that brings us to Chapter 5, The First Breach. What is it? Is it on me? Where is it on me? Is it on me? Can you see it on me? Can you see it? Where is it on me? Morning. After a night filled with dreams from atop a cliff. We know that dream from the very beginning of the book. He notices a velvet ant that has crawled onto this woman in the parking lot. It's harmless, and I'll get it off you. So somebody, Bella, posted on our Discord server is that Jeff Vandermeer gave some little clues, and he mentioned something about velvet ants. So pay special attention when you read about velvet ants. Something strange might be going on. Control took the ant into the fringe of vegetation, lining the parking lot, and let it crawl from his thumb onto the wood chips there. So long as you don't tell people you don't know something, they'll probably think you know it. That from his father, not his mother, surprisingly. Or perhaps not. His mother knew so much that maybe she thought she didn't need to pretend. I like that. Was he the woman with no clue where the ant was? Or the ant, unaware it was on the woman? Ooh, he's getting deep. He's getting philosophical. Is the Southern Reach really kind of boring its way into his mind? Control spent the first 15 minutes of his morning searching for the key to the locked desk drawer. This part's cool, too. He finally finds it. A plant grew in the drawer and been growing there in the dark this whole time, crimson roots attached to a nodule of dirt. 8 slender leaves, a deep, almost luminous green, protruded from the ridged stem at irregular intervals to form a pleasing circular pattern when viewed from above. At the base, half embedded in the clump of dirt, lay the desiccated corpse of a small brown mouse, as if it's been feeding on it. Next to the plant lay an old first-generation cell phone in a battered black leather case. layers of water-damaged file folders, almost as if someone had bizarrely come in and watered the plant from time to time. Who could that be? But he also caught glimpses of words that alarmed him, but we don't get to know what that is quite yet. Control carefully removed the mouse from the dirt and tossed it into the garbage. Then he lifted the plant into the pot and set it on the edge of his desk. Fortifying himself with a sip of bitter coffee, Control went over to the door. Yes, finally, the secret door. What does it hold? Well, he opened the door. He stared for several minutes. After a while, he closed it again. We have to wait. I love how Jeff Vandermeer is teasing us. He's saying, hey, you guys really need to keep reading to Chapter 6, Typographical Anomalies. I like that. It's a play on words because it used to be the topographical anomaly, the tower thing in the Area X, but now he's talking about typographical because we're talking about, of course, type. Same interrogation room, same worn chairs, same uncertain light, same ghost bird. Or was it? If someone seems to have changed from one session to another, make sure you haven't changed instead. Everybody is so damn deep in this book, but I guess it really adds to the mystique and the strangeness of the Southern Reach. A warning from his mother. On a whim, Control had retrieved the mouse from the trash and placed it in the pot with the plant. So he brings all of this stuff into the biologist. The words Control had found scrawled on the wall beyond the door kept curling through his head in an unpleasant way. Where lies the strangling fruit that came from the hand of the sinner? I shall bring forth the seeds of the dead. A plant, a dead mouse. We know this language, or we know these words. We know where they are. They're on the inside of the tower. Control ignored the water stains on the ceiling that resembled variously an ear and a giant subaqueous eye staring down. That's a cool image, and that really gives a sense of Control's state at this time. He thinks he's being watched. There's a topographical anomaly in Area X, fairly near base camp. Did you or any members of your expedition find this topographical anomaly? If so, did you go inside? I don't remember. So many other expeditions have encountered this topographical anomaly. Even so, she said, I don't remember a tower. A tower, she says. Why do you call it a tower? A grin appeared on Ghostbird's face. She's getting pretty creepy. Did you know, she replied, that the forest snail attaches the empty shells of other snails onto its own shell? As a result, the saltwater forest snail is very clumsy. It staggers and tumbles about because of these empty shells, which offer camouflage, but at a price. The deep well of secret mirth behind the answer stung him. She is toying with him. The biologist has much more of a personality than she did in the first book, doesn't she? Well, that's probably because she is not the biologist. And he thinks about channeling old Grandpa Jack, who would have said, topological anomaly, topological anomaly. Don't you mean witchcraft? Don't you mean the end of civilization? Don't you mean some kind of spooky thing that we know nothing, absolutely fucking nothing about, to go with everything else we don't know? Good old Grandpa Jack. If only he were here. To Grace and the rest of the team, he had said in a calm voice, is there anything else you can tell me about it? But they couldn't, of course. Any more, apparently, than could the biologist. Control just stared at her for a moment, but Ghostbird met his stare with those sharp green eyes until he looked away. What had changed in the past 24 hours? Because she is definitely changing. Perhaps this will jog your memory. He began to read summaries of accounts from the prior expeditions and how they're describing the tunnel, how they feel about it, how it is affecting them. A tower, a tunnel, a pit, a cyclone, a series of stairs. No two journals the same. But it was mostly his own sense of unease that made him pause and then stop. His feeling that in making the tower pit more real in his imagination, he was also making it more real in fact. I love how him just being here and exposed to just not just the biologist, but the employees, the assistant director, Whitby, of course, the weirdest guy of the bunch. It's changing him. It's making him paranoid. It's really working its way into his mind. It's very, again, Lovecraftian. What about the lighthouse? Approaching it from the trail through the reeds, looking in the doorway. He continues to get answers because he was Control and he was in control. Where lies the strangling fruit that came from the hand of the sinner? I shall bring forth. And on and on and on. We know this, but we get all of this very beautifully written back to back because we were getting very short snippets inside Annihilation. You say your last memory of Area X was of drowning in the lake. What do you remember specifically? It wasn't an Area X. It was my memory from when I was 5, or almost drowning in a public fountain. The fountain incident was a well-documented part of her file, though, since she had gone to the hospital for stitches. So has she been reading paperwork somehow, or is this really a memory that she has somehow gained access to? Because, come on, she's a copy, guys. I don't believe you, he said flatly. I don't care. I don't have a computer, she said. I don't have any of the books I requested. I'm being kept in a cell that has a tiny window high up on the wall, but he couldn't give her the book she wanted on memory loss. So what's cool about that is it feels like she is trying to figure something out. She doesn't feel like a evil creature that has some kind of plan. It's as if she's trying to figure out herself as well and why she can't remember. Does this mean anything to you? He asked to deflect her attention, pushing the potted plant mouse across the table to her. Plant the dead mouse? It's a sign you should give me my fucking books and a computer. Her contemptuous laughter followed him out into the hall. She's getting so damn weird, and I really hope they explain that or at least allow us to figure it out in some way, because this is not the biologist we know. Which brings us to chapter 7, Superstition. 20 minutes later, Control had contrived to cram Whitby, Grace, and the other staff linguist, Jessica Sue, into cramped quarters in front of the revealed section of wall with the director's peculiar handwriting words scrawled across it. So, this was the secret door. Well, you open the door, there's a wall there, there's the entire scripture stuff that is found inside the tower. It's also, though, a crude map of Area X drawn beneath the words. And there were 2 rather daunting slash marks about half a foot above Control said, with dates about 3 years apart. One red, one green. And the director's initials are beside them too. And then Grace says, these are words found written on the walls of the tunnel. But why did you leave it there? A memorial, Whitby said. It seemed too disrespectful to take it down. It's not a memorial because the director isn't dead. I don't believe she's dead. What does it mean? That's why we brought the linguist. First of all, we are 99.9% certain that this text is by the lighthouse keeper Saul Evans. Remember the initials? S.E. in the lighthouse? I do. He's right up there, Whitby said, pointing to the wall of framed images. In the middle of that black and white photo. He was retired as a preacher, actually. He left his ministry up north very suddenly for no documented reason, then came south and took the lighthouse keeper position. He'd been there for 5 years when the border came down. Do you think he brought whatever caused Area X with him? And why weren't these words in the files? We don't like to reproduce the words because we still don't know exactly what triggered the creation of Area X or why. Superstitious, right? Strange. We have this Seance and Science Brigade that we learned about. Is Grace affiliated somehow? Who knows? That's superstition, Sue said. It is superstition, she admitted, but it might be true. Interesting, because Control knew that beliefs in a scientific process only took you so far. The real core of the message, the meaning, would be conveyed by the combination of living matter that composed the words as if the ink itself was a message. If someone or something is trying to jam information inside your head using words you understand but a meaning you don't, it's not even that it's not on a bandwidth you can receive, it's much worse. Like if the message were a knife, it created its meaning by cutting into meat, and your head is the receiver and the tip of that knife is being shoved into your ear over and over again. That's a crazy way of describing it. So we think that Saul Evans wrote all of this long ago, right? He can't possibly be writing anything now, though. He'd be ancient at this point. We don't know. We just don't know. This unhelpfully from Whitby, while they all gave him a look like animals caught in the middle of the road late at night with a car coming fast. And that's the end. Wow. So more things are revealed. Some things that we already knew are starting to be expanded upon, connected to other things. I can't wait. I really hope Control gets to visit the border in this next sequence of chapters. So what are we going to read next time? Why don't we read through chapter 13, which will take us to page 164. So I will see you guys in the next video. Let me know down below how you're feeling about the book so far. Are you liking it more than Annihilation? Or are you liking it maybe a little bit less than Annihilation like me? Still, I'm very much enjoying it, and thanks for coming along the ride. Thanks for hanging out with me. Thanks for reading along with me, and I'll see you guys in the next video.